Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 for our Christian Nerds Unite favorite sci-fi novels. The beginning of a new year is when many people start thinking about their goals, and I'm no exception. The Goal Process 101 ebook has helped me clarify the best and most achievable goals for me, plus helped me set a plan in place to accomplish them. I mean, this podcast is just one of the results of using the Goal Process 101 ebook. Check it out at christiannerdsunite.com/goals. It helped me. I'm sure it can help you too. Now, back to the show. If you missed last week, definitely go back and listen to last week's episode. There's some great books we talk about. Now, let's get right into it and get right back to where we were for part 2. Now, one of my absolute favorites, and I probably read this once a year, Starship Troopers. Don't go see the movie. It's not worth it. The book is great. Robert Heinlein, 1959. If it's not the most controversial, it's definitely one of the most controversial books Heinlein ever wrote. It's a recruit from the future going through a super tough boot camp. The whole story is military based, and it's his journey in boot camp. He joining the Terran Mobile Infantry fighting against the enemy of mankind. It's set in the far future. The Earth's at war with an alien race. They're referred to as the Bugs. And then we also have another race that's kind of helping the humans called the Skinnies. Now, these are not their technical names, and I don't even know that the book gives them a technical name as far as their race. These are more the grunt military guy term for everything. And that is a big deal in this book. It is the grunt fighting on the ground military guy style book. So if you're into military books, this is a fun book, especially if you like sci-fi on top of that. It definitely is true hard science fiction, in my opinion. A lot of the inner workings are explained of how things function. It's sci-fi militarization. This is where we see some of the first powered armor appear, and that becomes a mainstay of science fiction going forward. So think about that. Powered armor. Somebody thought of powered armor to fight in a war in 1959. That's crazy to me to think that somebody in 1959 was futuristic enough to think that could be a thing. We're still not there, but I think it's possible we could get there. We also see an interesting bit in this book. We see these flashbacks of Rico, our main protagonist, as he's in class in high school, in a moral philosophy class that is trying to explain the culture and society that they live in. They discuss philosophical issues, moral issues, aspects of suffrage, who can vote and who can't vote and why. Civic virtue, what makes somebody good? Are people naturally good? They talk about juvenile delinquency, and especially they talk about war and why it has to be a thing or why it shouldn't be a thing. This book definitely leans into militarization and war being a good thing. A lot of people will say this is a novel that is has a fascist bent to it. I don't see it so much as a fascist bent, but it definitely is militarized. It definitely is a warlike book. Be aware if that is something that causes you issues. But I think it's a great read. There's a great story of Rico going to the military and separating from his family, being basically disowned by his father. We have this other story, later on we see them reconcile in an interesting way. We see Rico's journey from, kind of signing up for the military by mistake. Not mistake, that's the wrong word. He signs up for the military because his friend is, and because there's a cute girl there. And but then we see him become a true soldier. We see him become an officer and become the person he feels like he should have been all the time, and finally understanding how the world works. It's a great story. It's a great through line. The next book we have is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Now, most of you are going, what in the world? I have never heard of this book. Okay, if you've heard of Blade Runner, you've heard a little bit about this book. Blade Runner is based on the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And there are a couple of themes in the title that I'll kind of explain as we go along. This book's set in a dystopian future. It was written 1968 by Philip K. Dick. So we've got a lot of this, turmoil. It's dark and gritty, much like the movie was. It is a dark and gritty kind of a crime novel. It's a police procedural kind of thing. There's some things like that going on in the book. We've got detectives and we've got bounty hunters and, all those things that you see in the movie are part of the book, but the story, the through line is a little different. We've got sophisticated off-world androids who turn against their creators and they secretly slip back to Earth. And the key here is that androids aren't supposed to be on the planet. No androids are allowed on the planet. Androids can only be used off-planet, but they're coming back to Earth. I never feel like there's a good reason for them to come back to Earth, but they do. They have to be hunted down by these bounty hunters. And, Rick Deckard is one of the bounty hunters that is following the trail of these newly arrived sophisticated androids. Sophisticated to the point that you can't tell the difference between a human and an android without doing very special tests. And there's a couple of different tests that are named in the book to determine which is which. Now, there is a lot of different things going on here. We've got, androids not allowed on Earth. We've got people abandoning Earth or migrating off the Earth because the Earth has fallen to a nuclear fallout, and the people that stay, they're not as smart anymore and they're not able to have children, and so that's why a lot of people are leaving, but it's still a crowded world. There is this idea that people should keep animals. That just, you should have pets. That is a big theme in the movie. And this is why Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? If you can't afford a real animal, you can purchase for a much lower cost an electric animal. It looks the same, it sounds the same, it acts the same, but it's all electronic. You even feed it. It poops. To everyone else in the world, as far as they know, your electric sheep is a real sheep. And Deckard has a sheep, and he keeps it up on the roof. That's part of the storyline as well. Something goes wrong with his sheep. and it malfunctions, and he has to take it in to get it repaired, and he's desperate to have a real live animal. All he wants is a real live animal to care for. And that is part of the story, that if you're human, you want to care for something, you should care for animals. If you're an android, you wouldn't care, and you don't care about it. There's a religion of sorts that comes into play. A lot of emotion is tied in with the book. Feelings, caring for people, emoting, joining in with this religious group that watches this guy climb a mountain every day, feeling his pain, feeling others' pain, finding androids that don't feel pain. And that's part of the idea of the test, is that androids can't pass the test because they don't have feelings. Humans can pass the test because they do. Now, if you're a little squeamish, some of the questions that are asked in the Voight-Kampff test are really disturbing. So just be aware if you read this book, there are some scenes that are very disturbing. In the end, it is pretty ambiguous as to whether Deckard is actually a human or an android. That is a big part of this story. Is he or is he not? And he is definitely led to believe that he might be, but it's never clarified in the book. And it definitely is a great book. I will say Blade Runner is a great movie, definitely worth watching. The book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, is a great book, and you should definitely check both out. There you will see major differences, and I think you'll enjoy the book on its own. Next, we have Dune by Frank Herbert, 1965. This is a book that, there was a movie that came out, I think, in the 70s. It may have been early 80s, called Dune. And then we're about to have another Dune come out, hopefully, if everything works out right, later this year of 2021. So we'll see what that movie looks like. But it's a feudal society. There is, there's the houses that are in charge of different places and different worlds, and they're passed from father to son. We've got kings. It definitely feels like a medieval novel set in the future. And we have a substance called spice. The trade in this substance is super important to the economy. It's a drug that extends life. It enhances mental abilities, and it also is required for space navigation. So it's super important. It's only available on this one planet, and whoever controls that planet controls the spice, and they basically control the galaxy because of it. And this book follows the adventures of Paul Atreides. He's the son of a betrayed duke, and he goes to this planet where the spice is. He's adopted by nomadic people in the desert, and he comes to age and becomes one of their leaders, and becomes kind of a messiah figure for them. And he, is able to finally succeed in the end. Now, there are 5 other sequels in this series. I have not read all the other series. I will say this is a very dense book. This is a thick, long book. It's good. It really is good. But be aware, it's time consuming. It is not an easy read, but it is great. We see a lot of political strife, a form of, like I said, the Messiah kind of situation, and a lot of feudal infighting between families. We have a pseudo-religious group with a a semi-religious name. This group of only women that have special mental powers, and they play a part into the story as well. We've got the kings that are the leaders. We've got the desert dwelling people that are starting a jihad. It's a political thriller and a war book all at the same time. It's fascinating how they managed to tie this all together. It really is a great book and worth your time. Now, before I give my last book, here are some kind of honorable mentions. Now, I won't say any of the books I mentioned earlier, they're not in any particular order. I really, really enjoy all of them. And I really enjoy the books I'm about to mention, but I think they are a little harder to get into. From a Christian perspective, some of them are a little more questionable. So be aware, and I'll mention some of those things as I go through these honorable mentions pretty quickly. But the last book that I'm going to list it's really probably one of my favorite all-time sci-fi books ever. And we'll get to that as soon as we're done with this list of honorable mentions. Now, I've really enjoyed all of these. Next, it's The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. It's another Ray Bradbury book. Great writer. It's actually a set of 18 science fiction stories that they deal a great deal with death, racism, the end of the world, and it's all told from the perspective of a man showing off his various tattoos, based on the title, The Illustrated Man. And the tattoos seem to kind of come to life as he tells the stories. One interesting story even kind of has a Jesus theme. And this man who is chasing after Jesus from planet to planet as he moves through the universe. So it's an interesting story. It's worth checking out. Just be aware, there are some really, really dark themes in The Illustrated Man. Next is The Animal Farm. George Orwell's Animal Farm. This is a very political novel. And I sometimes even question whether it's science fiction. I think it fits. It's not fantasy. It is more political, psychological science fiction, where farm animals overthrow their human rulers, but they put in their own form of government, which in the end looks very much like the government that they overthrew. So definitely tons of political implications here, and you'll want to be aware. Next is 2001: A Space Odyssey. This is Arthur C. Clarke's seminal work. It deals a lot with death and evolution, the dangers of artificial intelligence, and nuclear war. This is absolutely a classic. It's an interesting read. It's a little unusual because it's one of the few books that was developed along with the movie that its name also includes. The book and the movie were developed together at the same time. So there's some interesting interplay there. And there's lots of symbolism that's not really explained well in the book or in the movie. So it can be a difficult read, a difficult understand, but it's a great book. Next is Brave New World by Huxley. This is a dystopian novel. Now, be aware this one deals a lot with sexual ideas, individualism or the lack thereof, drugs that bring contentment, a caste system that's in place, genetic engineering to the point of you're not born from a mother, you're decanted from a jar. And those are some of the subjects that are in this book. It is, once again, it's a heavy book. It deals a lot with the political implications of these ideas, and they bring in an outsider that they call a savage, and you see his perception of their world. It's an interesting book. It is well worth the read, but be aware is some strong sexual content in this book. Next is Fahrenheit 451. This is a great book. It probably should have made my main list, but it just ran out of spaces, honestly. It is a great book. Once again, a dystopian novel where totalitarian regime has ordered all books to be burned by these people called firemen, because now firemen set fires instead of putting them out. It ends with a group who are seeking to preserve knowledge because they are expecting nuclear war to wipe out all of civilization. Their plan is to survive and still have the knowledge of the books so that they can rebuild society. So it's an interesting concept. One of the themes throughout this book is that the Bible is one of the books that's actively being saved. And I think that's a great thing, to throw into our Christian podcast, that it is actually, the Bible is listed as one of the books that is being saved, and it's one of the prominent books included. Next, we have George Orwell's 1984. Now, it's 2021, and the book 1984 is being thrown around a lot nowadays with all the political upheaval that's going on. Once again, this is a totalitarian novel, a dystopian novel. There's a government that watches over all the citizens. Big Brother is watching you. They're changing the meanings of words and removing words from the dictionary. They are rewriting history to match their narrative. Once again, be aware there is some strong sexual content in this book as well, and it is kind of a major theme in the book. So be aware of that outside of those totalitarian government ideas. But it's a fascinating read. It is something to be considered anytime you're thinking, have we changed the meaning of words over time? 1984 definitely addresses those ideas. Next is Stranger in a Strange Land. This is another Robert Heinlein book. I mentioned earlier, his book called Starship Troopers, which I absolutely love. Stranger in a Strange Land is completely different sci-fi. They are not related in any way, but a man that's born on Mars has special powers that the Martians teach him, and he comes to Earth, and he becomes treated almost like a messiah and starts basically his own religion. Be aware, once again, there is a lot of strong sexual content. It's unusual to me that there's so much sci-fi that has so much of this classic sci-fi has strong sexual content. This book definitely has a lot of that. Be aware. Next is A Clockwork Orange. This is Anthony Burgess. Most people are familiar with this book or with this movie. A dystopian novel rampant with drugs, sex, and ruthless violence. It is a brutal book to read, but it is fascinating. Now, let's talk about my final choice. This is, like I said, it's probably my all-time favorite book, and it is The Martian Chronicles. Martian Chronicles, it's Ray Bradbury, 1950. The idea that there were Martians, that kind of idea was rampant in the 50s, that they might exist, that there's something out there. It should be thought of less as a novel and more as a collection of stories. And in this instance, the Martian Chronicles are each individual story kind of builds on the next. Not every single one, but a lot of them are like, early exploration is where we start. And, we have the first expedition and then the second expedition, the third expedition. Then we have colonization later on. So the stories somewhat build on each other or may reference back to one of the others from time to time. Now, depending on the edition, there may be around 20 different stories that are in the Martian Chronicles. Different editions will have a different number of stories. They're all really great. They're all fairly light reading, which is another reason I really like this book. Is it is light science fiction. It's not hard science fiction. It's an easy read. It's enjoyable. It's fun. And there are some dark subjects that go along with it, but it can be an interesting read. The stories explore, like I said, the early expeditions of Mars, what happens to those astronauts, as well as, full Mars colonization, the human race escaping Earth as it falls into nuclear war. Those are the kind of backstory that you're running with in this book. First, know that there are Martians in this book. That is an accepted idea, and that depending on the individual story, their appearance may change and their abilities may change. It's not entirely cohesive, but for the most part, it works. There are many themes. The idea of a hostile world, finding place that they want to live on is inhabited, finding out that it's inhabited after they've arrived, what they do about that now, what colonization does, how does that affect people, the mistrust, the miscommunication, the misunderstanding between cultures. Those are all themes that are covered throughout the Martian Chronicles. So some are from the perspective of the human race, while others are from the Martian perspective. And that is a great way to look at this novel. When you're reading through it, you'll turn the page and all of a sudden we're not looking at the humans that have landed. We're looking at, what are the Martians thinking about what's going on their planet? All these people showing up. There's a Martian man and wife. They have kind of distanced themselves from each other in their marriage. And what happens when a human man shows up? It's a fascinating story. One of the other cool stories that I really like is it's actually usually one of the last, if not the last story. A family they're trying to save enough money to send one person to Mars. That's all they can do. They could build one rocket. They can afford to build one rocket and send one of their family members to Mars. And after much discussion and, much thinking, the father just changes his mind. And rather than building a rocket that will take them to Mars before the Earth is destroyed in nuclear war, he builds a model rocket where each of their family members can join in, get in the rocket, and enjoy a quote unquote trip to Mars. And then at the end, the assumption is that they will succumb to the destruction of the Earth along with everyone else, but they'll do it together and they will have had some enjoyment along the way. This one is my favorite story. It's fascinating, and it comes from a Christian perspective. At least what someone would say, these are questions a Christian might have to consider at some point if extraterrestrial life was real. And, whether you believe it is or isn't, I'm not going to have that debate at this point, but that's the storyline. What does a Christian do when you find out Martians are real? This one is where the Martians definitely appear differently. And there is some conjecture as to why they appear differently, whether they're really Martians or whether they're a Martian projection. What I mean by that is many of the stories have situations where the Martians are able to read the minds of the humans that are arriving before they show up. That's number one. Once they show up, they're able to use those thoughts and ideas that they've picked up from them and be able to project into their minds things that really aren't there. Things as simple as just, a small place, or as complicated as a full town with all of their relatives in them. So this story, the question is, are these Martians that we're seeing, or is this a projection that was picked up from something that one of the members in this story thought of while he was on the way? So it's called the fire balloons, and it also appears in some editions of the Illustrated Man. So be aware, you may see this story two different places. It's a story about an Episcopal missionary expedition, and they are going there to cleanse Mars of sin. And they're discussing on the way what that means. Are they there to, preach to the human race that has started colonizing, or are they there to preach to the Martians and to save the Martians? They're very interested in finding out what kind of sins the Martians could actually commit so that they would know, what kind of salvation they could have. When they arrive, they find out the Martians are not a humanoid form. Now, this is the only story where they're not a humanoid form. And that's why I say the question, are these really Martians, or are these a projection of something that one of the fathers was thinking about on his way? Because as they're traveling, he has this memory of he and his father seeing these fiery balloons being sent off, and they glow in the night sky. So in this particular story, the Martians are depicted as blue, luminous globes of light. In all of the other stories, the Martians are humanoid forms with a bronze-colored skin. So this one's different. They are blue, luminous globes of light. So the priests go and they run into these globes of light, and there's a couple of situations where they have an accident, and the globes save them. And they had heard that stories like that before from the townspeople. So the globes saved their lives. So then they basically put the globes to the test, and one of the fathers on purpose falls from a height, and the globes save him. In another instance, he attempts to shoot himself, and the globes save him. He decides to build a church. So in 7 days, he builds a church for them, and it's designed for them. It has imaging that resembles them. He has a Christ-like image, which is more like a blue globe than what we would see as a Christ. After, having kind of a discussion or a meeting with these blue globes, he finds that they are virtuous, and the priests return to the human settlement to cleanse it of sin, because they feel like these blue globes, these Martians they have no sin, so they don't need the priests. Now, that's a fascinating story. It's fascinating to think about that idea. What happens if extraterrestrials are real? What does that mean for Christians today? How do we evangelize? What does that mean? It's a fascinating mental exercise. But I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna have the argument as to whether or not extraterrestrials are real or not. But it is a fascinating idea. If you are interested in that idea, you should also check out C.S. Lewis's essay titled Religion and Rockets. It can be found in the book called The World's Last Night and Other Essays. So C.S. Lewis does actually address this idea of aliens and Christianity and what that means. So don't think it's just a Ray Bradbury idea. Well, that's my list. That's my top 10 and a whole bunch of honorable mentions. This was a two-part episode, so if you're just getting into the show, definitely go back and check the previous episode, part 1, for the first half of the books that I talk about. We definitely hope you will join us next week. We have just recently started a Patreon, and you can check that out as well as previous episodes of our show by going to ChristianNerdsUnite.com. And hey, we've got some t-shirts that we're starting to sell just to see if anybody's interested. And you can check that out at shop.ChristianNerdsUnite.com. Please join our Facebook group and our Facebook page. You can find us at Christian Nerds Unite as well as on Instagram. Well, this has been an absolute blast. I did a survey and I was amazed at the number of people that had read these books and that were excited to hear about them. So I had a lot of fun putting this last 2 episodes together, and we will see you next week.